Hello and welcome to Talk Julia. My name is David Amos.
And my name's Randy Davila.
Randy, this is a very exciting episode. We have our very first guest, Logan Kilpatrick. Logan, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm really excited about this. Thank you both for having me.
Absolutely. So, Logan, I see you all over the place on Twitter, and I've been to a couple like the Twitter spaces that you've hosted, and I see you writing on Medium.
When I do research for our episodes, I come across Logan's posts all the time, so many times. I think you're the predominant person that I come across. So, just have to put that out there.
So, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, because you work for is it Julia, like the Julia Language Organization or Julia Computing, or what is it that you do for the Julia community?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I think it's honestly, it's something that folks are always asking, just because sometimes the relationship between some of the companies and organizations is a little bit less than clear. And we do have a governance page on the Julia website, so hopefully it helps clarify if folks are digging around, but it's sort of hard to find. So I technically work for the Julia Project, which is a legal entity associated with NumFocus. So it's a NumFocus sponsored project. So all the financials and legal infrastructure are handled through NumFocus. And then obviously work very closely with a lot of the folks at Julia Computing, just because they have a vested interest in the success of the Julia project. But I don't work for Julia Computing, specifically working on the Julia project.
Gotcha. And how long have you been doing that for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started sort of officially in this position originally came on to actually just help with sort of educational resources. So I'd emailed Viral and Vic, and really that's what I wanted to sort of help out with. And then probably 2 or 3 months into that process, back in January of 2020, Viral reached out to me and was like, hey, we have this community manager title that, we used to give to somebody and no one has that title anymore. Like, do you want to be the community manager? And I was like, naively said yes and didn't really understand what it entailed. And then as soon as I took that sort of title, the work and scope of everything that I was doing sort of changed. Then it just became very much like, everything that the project needs is really what I end up helping out with. So it's really expanded over the last 2 years to be, JuliaCon stuff, to outreach initiatives, to partnership initiatives with companies, like helping get Julia on, W3 schools and LinkedIn Learning and all these other platforms. So it's super, and running Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs, it's all over the place, which I think is what's so fun for me, is that it's really not there's not a lot of focus in one specific area. So it's, I can sort of run around with my head cut off, write articles, speak at events, do all types of stuff. So it's a ton of fun. I actually love it. It's awesome.
So that sounds ridiculous. There's so many things that you're doing. And you just mentioned right before we started recording, you're in a master's program right now?
Yes, 2 master's programs, technically.
Okay, so that's even more ridiculous. What are those programs? I'm just curious myself.
Yeah, so I'm at Harvard. I'm doing a master's degree with a focus in digital media design, specifically focusing within the area of educational technology. So learning how to create better educational content, technology, all that sorts of stuff, which dovetails perfectly with a lot of the stuff that I do in the Julia community. And then independent of that, I'm also a graduate student at Northwestern's University Pritzker School of Law, and I'm just doing a Master of Law there, focused on intellectual property. So again, very much interested. It dovetails perfectly. It sounds all over the place, but it makes perfect sense in the context of open source, and there's tons of legal implications and all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of focus of a lot of the work that I do, but it is sort of seems a little bit weird at first.
That's very impressive.
Thank you.
Do you ever sleep?
I do sleep 8 hours every night like a baby. It's awesome.
That's great.
Speaking of of educational content, how do you feel about these Pluto Notebooks that I've started to love? Do you use them at all, or have you not gotten there yet, or you don't really care? It's either way, it doesn't matter.
You know what? I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I encourage sort of all those folks who are working on Pluto. I think Fonz and co are doing an incredible job of building something from the ground up. I personally haven't sort of gotten the itch yet to start using Pluto Notebooks. Like, to me, again, what would be the most valuable is sort of having reactive notebooks sort of in conjunction with the traditional notebook, where you can sort of go through it step by step. Because again, for educational content, I can see so many use cases where you want to go through step by step and not sort of show what the output and things like that are going to be necessarily. I'll probably get there. I'm sure I'll be convinced at some point, but I do think it's amazing that they've built something that will hopefully someday rival sort of the scale and scope of Jupyter, which is this massive ecosystem.
Right.
So you mentioned like how you kind of got started, or how you kind of came into working for the Julia project. Were you using Julia before that?
Yeah, so the thing that actually got me into using Julia was when I originally started interning and contracting at NASA, the team that I joined just happened to be using Julia. So there was no sort of intention on my point to join this team because of Julia or anything. So I joined, the code base was all in Julia, and this was before the 1.0 release. So I had the chance to help rewrite some of the code from 0.6 to 0.7 and then ultimately to 1.0, which sort of forced me to get into open source and get involved with asking questions. And then that ultimately led to me actually contributing to the community and things like that.
That's so awesome. I remember 0.6 was like my first Julia download was 0.6, right? And that's where I started. So it's kind of cool to hear you like say that like you were a part of like kind of changing things and it's just awesome.
Yeah, so I'm the Julia baby here. My first Julia download was 1.7, so.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, though. I mean, 1.7, you didn't have to rewrite any of your code, which is really nice.
Yeah. So what team was it that you were working with at NASA?
Yeah, so I was working at the NASA Amos Research Center in Mountain View, California, and the specific team was I think it was part of it's called the Intelligent Systems Group, and they used Julia and POMDP's partially observable Markov decision processes to actually model real-world rover environments. So specifically, we're creating a bunch of lunar traverses for the upcoming NASA Viper mission in 2024. So we actually built this decision-making software to help optimize the lunar traverses, and they actually created this optimized traverse that they're actually going to use for the lunar rover mission in 2024, which is super crazy.
That is very cool.
So, yeah, like traditionally the experts at NASA would like sit in a room and they'd have like maps out and they'd sort of just like draw out what they thought was the right thing and then try to like make sure that was right. And it really was not like a very data driven approach. So this software that we built, and then in conjunction with a bunch of the folks at Stanford's, I forgot CISL, I forgot what the acronym stands for, Intelligent Systems at Stanford. Michael Kurgendorfer and a bunch of folks there built up a bunch of amazing software, which we use to do a lot of the sort of heavy lifting for the decision making.
I had no idea that Julia was being used that early on for these types of things.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that the group at Stanford really sort of made that decision early on, because like when we started, and I joined this project at NASA, and they had already been going for like at least a year and a half maybe. And this was in late 2016, I think, or something like that. So they must have been using it from like 0.4, 0.3, something like that. I don't know for sure. But so that group at Stanford really sort of committed to using Julia for POMDP stuff. And it became sort of now if you want to do POMDP stuff and you're looking for the state of the art, all of that work is in Julia. All the state of the art tools are written in Julia because they made that bet on Julia so early on.
That's really amazing. It's actually kind of shocking to me, just knowing kind of the way, these are like mission critical kind of applications. That's putting a lot of trust into a really new and rapidly changing, I would imagine at that point it was, very rapidly changing.
Say it took a long time. Like I think to get to the point where, and obviously I didn't do a lot of this heavy lifting. I think the folks that I worked with at NASA were incredible, and they sort of went through this long process of sort of just even like trying to convince other people at NASA that it made sense to use a system that would sort of automatically reason and sort of make these decisions both in real time and ahead of time. So I think it's a lot of credit to them for sort of lobbying this effort over the last 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is.
It's interesting to me that so your solution basically, or the solution that came about was like a data centered solution and not like this manual thing that you were mentioning earlier. And it's interesting how so many things around us are doing that, and have been doing that. It's starting around 2015 or so is when I really noticed that data science and the use of data was really kind of blossoming. So it's just another interesting story to think about. If you're a data scientist, which I kind of call myself that. I'm more of a mathematician, but sometimes data scientist. I don't know.
I love that.
Well, now you're teaching so much data science stuff now for where you're working. So yeah, that's a really cool story. I had not heard that, and I wasn't aware, so I come from a Python background. I've been using Python for a long time, and you hear a lot of stories of, Python being used in at NASA and in, astronomy and astrophysics and things like that. And while I knew that sure there were people using it, that's a really great story. Getting those, we need to maybe document that or something. Maybe this is serving as documentation for that story, but because those are the kinds of things that I think really inspire people to hear about that, and then also go check out, wow, it's being used for this amazing kind of otherworldly kind of thing, right?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of other super interesting use cases out there just like this. And I totally agree with you. My mentor and my boss at NASA, I don't think he is going to give a JuliaCon talk anytime soon to share about this work, which sucks because I think he's incredible and the team's done incredible work. But I think that there's so many other people who are probably out there who are like him, who have done this awesome stuff using Julia, and they just haven't shared it for whatever reason, which makes total sense for whatever reason. But I totally agree. I wish more people would share those interesting use cases that they've been working on.
Yeah. So I saw recently, kind of shifting gears a little bit, that you were previously working at Apple as well.
Yes,
you had a position at Apple until yesterday. Okay. and I just happened, because right before we started recording, I was looking at your Twitter bio just to kind of make sure I remembered some things about you and didn't look like a fool. But now you started a new position with Path AI. Is that the new position you've started? Are you getting a chance to use Julia there at all, or?
Yeah, so that role at Path AI is, a portion of that will be me continuing to be sort of a machine learning engineer, but really the focus is on machine learning and open source advocacy. So getting Path AI's machine learning, the work that they're doing in the machine learning space out, into the ML ecosystem, into the open source ecosystem, making sure we're contributing the right places so that, Path AI is strategically positioned, things like that. So it's not a role where I'll be sort of directly, forcing engineers to use Julia necessarily. Obviously, I'm always going to continue to advocate for that.
Yeah.
But it is not like a super Julia focused role. I think that they'll be a prime candidate for using Julia, but it's not necessarily specifically why I'm there.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's I do a lot of freelance programming, and I've been doing that for several months now since I left my previous job at Real Python, but and that's I'm still using Python every day for that, and it can be, some of it is you've got systems out there, right, that it's like I'm probably never gonna rewrite those in Julia. It's just, it wouldn't make sense. So I know it can be hard when you've got people that they've got a lot of time invested in these things, and it's a little bit easier maybe if you've got a new project that you can kind of start to bring that on. But speaking of Python, I think I read somewhere, I couldn't remember where I saw this. I think it maybe in one of an articles that I read that you wrote on Medium or something. You said you had experience with Django.
Yeah.
And so were you working with Python before you started working with Julia, and or did you kind of pick those up at the same time, or you were? Okay. So I'm just kind of curious, how that transition was for you.
I think you were asking a question very similar to what I was thinking. it's like, how did you get into programming? So, for example, I taught myself with YouTube, but like, I'm very curious to know your progression from the beginning to where you're at now, where you're writing these like really awesome articles that help me like learn more about Julia. So I'm curious.
No, that's a good question. So I think I have a very sort of traditional path into computer science. Like I actually started off at community college learning like C++, Java. I took Python classes in community college, and I think the first real applications that I worked on, my first internship was on a different team actually at NASA using Python. So did a bunch of Python stuff there, then started at the team at NASA using Julia, ultimately transitioned, left that team, went to Disney, did a bunch of C# stuff, which was fun. I actually like C#. I thought it was cool. And then left Disney, went back to Apple, and then at Apple for the last 2 years has been all Python stuff. So, I do all of this Julia stuff sort of almost in a lot of sense on the side of, I still am sort of a daily user of Python when I was working at Apple, and I anticipate it'll be the same thing at Path.ai. So I think it helps me to like just being more in touch with what people who are transitioning to Julia are actually experiencing. Like I think if I was sort of too deep in the Julia bubble, I'd sort of forget all the normal things that people who use Python or other languages have to deal with. So I think it's been helpful in that sense, but that's the sort of the programming language journey, at least for me thus far.
I think I think I can tell, right? Like your articles help me more so than a lot of the other articles that I read. Maybe that's like my comprehension of things. I don't know. It's harder for me, I guess. But like your articles help me, and I think it's because you kind of write from that other programming language to Julia. Like I appreciate that.
I'm glad that they help you. Honestly, I think that's awesome. I see numbers as far as people who read my articles, but it's not always clear that it's actually helping somebody. So I'm happy that at least one person finds value from it.
Yeah, I do for sure. Really, one of my biggest struggles is that I can't find enough resources on Julia, right? Or the resources that I find are so like I don't know the right word to describe it, just so technical that it's hard for me to engage and learn it, right? And so when I do come across the various pieces, like your pieces and a few others that I can think of, that actually like engage me and it's not overwhelming, it's needed. And there needs to be a lot more of that, I feel like, in the Julia community.
I agree 100%. I think I'm actually in the same position as you. I think as far as my I do all this Julia stuff, and I think people who I work with or who don't know me and like see the actual work that I do think that I, am the number one expert on Julia in the world. And that's just not the case. And I actually think it's really helpful for me to not be that person. Like, Chris Rackauckus can, do a billion things that I have no idea how to do, like programmatically using Julia. But I really think that, I'm again in the same exact boat as you, Randy, that, there are a bunch of resources that I look at and just have a really hard time sort of sifting through them. And my goal is always, whenever I'm making some piece of content, is to make it as accessible as possible, because the lower that, if we only make content for people who are at that really advanced level, then the Julia community will always continue to stay super niche. So there needs to be content to sort of bridge that gap to get people to the point where they can feel comfortable with that advanced content that's out there.
Absolutely.
That makes me feel a lot better. Having you tell me that you're like in the same, like, it makes me feel a lot better. Because like sometimes I'm reading these articles and I have a PhD in math and I'm just like, ugh. I don't know. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's, and it'll part of it is, it just is going to take time for that kind of stuff to appear. And, as there's more of a need, there will probably be more people that step up and start to produce some of that kind of content. But yeah, really, you do need a wide range of content. And in a lot of ways, and I say this from experience of someone who is an advanced Python programmer, writing beginner content can actually be much more difficult than writing advanced content, because there are so many other things that you have to think about. It's not just about the code. It's about having empathy for your reader and thinking about what sort of questions are going through their mind and where are they going to get stuck, and trying to anticipate all that. So it's writing beginner level content that is good is very difficult. So I appreciate the effort you've put into making the articles you've written as accessible as possible. And hopefully we'll see more and more of that come out as Julia. I'm convinced at this point that Julia is just on a path upwards and in adoption, and so we'll see. Hopefully we'll see more of that come out so more people can get into it. So Logan, you mentioned earlier something about a new project called Forum. Could you talk some about that?
Yeah, totally. So it's a really interesting project. So Forum is actually the open source project which powers a website called dev.to. So dev.to is like this massive, it's like a platform for developers to go on and share content and things like that. So Forum is the open source project, and they've actually sort of very much in a discourse sort of like fashion. You can basically create your own forum and have this sort of platform where you can go and create content about some very specific programming community. So the Julia project actually has a forum instance sort of in the works right now, and we think that it could be the thing to sort of help propel, going back to our conversation about creating educational content that's sort of at an entry level, accessible level, and hopefully this platform sort of reinforces the idea that we need this content. You should create this content and share it. Like, I also think one of the other challenges that we didn't talk about was there's probably a lot of great content out there. It's just hard to find. Like, I don't know who all the people are who have written the content. And like, unless it's the first thing that shows up in Google, like, I'm never going to find it. So having sort of a centralized community platform to both write content, post content, share content is really cool. And it has all the sort of features that you would want in a community forum. So I'm really excited, and I think it'll be a nice supplement to platforms like Discourse and all the other community tools that we have available to us right now so far.
Absolutely. So I didn't realize that's the forum you were talking about. I am familiar with that. I've used dev.to, and I think that's great. That is a really good platform because it is sort of like you can almost sort of blog on it, but then you can also kind of use it as a discussion forum. And it's got like sort of this many different kind of use cases that all sort of work seamlessly together. So that's fantastic. I think that's awesome.
I've never heard of it before.
It's really popular. I think it all started with a guy who made this platform like for himself, actually, and like there's a Twitter account and all this stuff, and it was originally just him, and they basically spun this platform out into an open source company, which is super, super cool. So I've chatted with them a bunch over the last 3 months trying to get this all set up and situated, and it'll be really cool. And just to go back to one other point of why I'm so excited about this, the other piece too that you mentioned, David, is like a lot of people like write things right now, but maybe it's on their personal blog, maybe it's like in this other place, and a lot of those platforms actually don't have a way to have a discussion. Like, I can read your blog post, maybe it shows up on Julia bloggers, but like I can't interact with it except on Twitter or somewhere else. So it'll be nice, again, to have somewhere where people can share their content and we can actually have a discussion about it and have that sort of interaction. So I'm excited about that aspect as well.
Yeah, very cool. And I know that, with like being able to make comments and everything and have that discussion, there's this discuss tool that you can put like on a website and everything. But I know that so I have that on my own website just because it was so easy to integrate, but it also really bothers me that like all that data, all those comments, like I don't have any of that. That's all on someone else's server somewhere, So with Forum, I think because you'll be running like your own instance, you'll have all that, it's not subject to someone else and could get lost or something like that. So it gives you a lot more control over that aspect of it. I think that's fantastic. That's super cool. So, any idea on on like the timeline for that, or?
I think so. We just signed like the agreement within the last couple of weeks. So we have hopefully some onboarding in the next couple of months or in the next few weeks for me to get everything set up and ready to go, and then hopefully an announcement, official announcement, not this behind the scenes announcement, in hopefully the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. It just depends on bandwidth on my part and other folks.
Awesome.
I really like this dev.to thing, by the way. I was looking at it. In the first article I see, or first like thread or whatever, Docker, explained to a 5-year-old. And I'm like, yes. That's me.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff on there that people post about pretty much everything.
The other cool part too is there's a lot of really awesome integrations back to the dev community. So dev has like 1 million plus users or something like that. So it'd be nice, like the Julia forum instance will be like promoted and shown to, you know, this huge group of folks who might not know what Julia is yet. So it'll be really cool to have that be sort of one of the initial users of your use cases for forum. So I'm excited for that as well. Lots of excitement.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, speaking of, you know, people not knowing about Julia, I kind of had a question about if you've noticed anything about things changing or some different kinds of users coming to Julia. So in my experience, the people that I've talked to, and now through doing this podcast, I've kind of I've gotten the chance to meet mainly on Twitter, you know, lots of people that are plugged into the Julia community. And then also have people that have found us on YouTube that are kind of like, I'm just getting started with Julia. You know, I don't know anything about it. This is great. They're kind of, my sense is that a lot of people sort of have this feeling of like, oh, Julia, that's either like they just don't know what it is, or they've heard the name and like, I don't know much about it, or that it's like strictly kind of like a scientific language. And I noticed, you know, you've written now a couple of different articles about Julia for data science. Are you noticing that there's more people in the data science world that are kind of having their interest piqued by Julia and starting to explore that, or what have you noticed anything about that, or what can you say about that?
Yeah, no, I think there definitely are. I think as far as you said it correctly. I think it's a lot of interest being piqued. I don't know if there's, you know, folks are sort of jumping away from their Python, you know, trusty Python workflows and right away switching to Julia. But I think there's a lot of people who are at least hearing things and they're interested in learning more. And again, for me and for other people in the community, the focus right now is about, you know, if someone is coming to take a look, like how can we put our best foot forward? How can we, you know, make sure that the right resources are in place so that if they do want to make that jump, you know, we have the tools and it's not a scary transition, all that sort of stuff. And you know, it's hard to say whether or not that's a huge group of people. Like, I think there's just so many, you know, there's so many question marks as far as all the metrics go and like where folks are actually coming from. But I do think that the point you mentioned about people thinking that Julia is a scientific programming language, which it is, but it's also, there's this inherent tension between, you know, obviously we want Julia to be really big and we want lots of people to benefit from the value that the language provides. But then there's also this need to continue to focus on the people who are actually using Julia to do stuff, which tends to be people in the scientific domain. And again, it's this tension for me, I'm always trying to push Julia into new spaces where it's not being talked about and it's not being used extensively. Like web development is something that I've been looking at recently, and no one really uses Julia for web development outside of the Genie community. But I think going back, we were talking about Django for a brief moment, and I think Genie could be a great sort of filler for not having Django, which is an amazing open source project. So there's so many opportunities, but I do think that it's so hard to walk the fine line of that tension between Julia is in general purpose programming language, can be used for anything, but also right now at the present moment is mostly being used for scientific stuff.
Right. Yeah. And I would imagine too, it's hard, you know, because I think about Python's own history. And certainly when Python was created, no one ever, I don't think like Guido van Rossum sat down and thought, I bet people are going to be using this to study black holes in, 20 years or something. I can't imagine that was something that was going through his head. Like that wasn't a use case he had in mind. So it's hard to, it's impossible to predict the future and know like where Julia 20 years from now will be and what it's being used for and everything. Right. So, but I do wonder, like, what do you think some of the barriers are right now? Is it mainly just a kind of a lack of content, or what do you think for new people that are coming or might have their interest piqued in, I mean, I can think of some technical barriers of like, well, I can't use it because everyone else at my job is using Python or using C++ or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, you can't make that decision. But yeah, what do you think some of the big barriers besides that kind of stuff is?
I think that honestly probably captures a majority. Like even for me right now, it's like, why would I not try to really, earhole everybody that I worked with at Apple into using Julia for all of the machine learning work that we're doing? Well, the reality is that, we have all this infrastructure internally that's built around Python stuff and things like that. So it's I think that's a huge reason. The other piece too is I always tell people, the folks who are making the transition to Julia, for the most part, and this obviously isn't true in all cases, are people who are at the limit of what their other tools can actually do. Someone who's trying to do, black hole stuff and, the computational resources necessary to do that, it just takes too long to do in Python. And I think for my team that I was on at NASA, that was the case. If we wanted to do all the same simulation stuff, our simulations in Julia sometimes took an entire day. Yeah. So if we wanted to do them in Python, it would have been like 4 or 5 days, which just isn't practical to actually run. So a lot of folks are those people in those situations where things are taking too long, they don't have the bandwidth, and they're just sitting there waiting for something to finish running. They're like, okay, well, now I can go and invest the time to learn this tool.
Right.
So I think that's a huge piece of the market. And then to go back to the point on resources, again, I really do think that we're probably 2 years away from having just a really robust set of tutorials and things like that out there where, again, we're sort of covered on all the major websites that have educational content, things like that. So I'm again excited to see. Hopefully I don't have to do all that work. Hopefully there's other folks who are interested in helping out with that. But yeah, but you know what, if it ends up being me having to do it all, I think that's fine. I'm happy with that. Ultimately, in the end of hopefully getting more people interested in this ecosystem who will eventually create some of these resources.
So I want to ask you a question related to like my position. So I teach data science and machine learning courses at 2 universities, Rice University and U of H downtown, University of Houston downtown. And I do have like the choice to pick between languages, right? Now, with that choice, like in one of our episodes, we even talked about this a little bit, that like I would give my students like a disservice if I did not show them like TensorFlow and scikit-learn and these types of things in Python. However, it's just so much more natural to program a lot of the algorithms from scratch in Julia, with the exception of support vector machines. Those are kind of difficult, but like whatever. So like from your standpoint, like as someone that's trying to spread the word about Julia, what advice would you give to professors that are having the same type of, conundrum that I'm in? I want to use it because it feels right, but if they go out into industry, like, will they be like bad off? I don't know. I wanted to ask your opinion.
Yeah, obviously I'm super biased in this. I think I oftentimes approach it again from the student's perspective as far as, what would the value add be for somebody who learns Julia potentially like instead of Python in a class like the one that you're describing. And I think there's really, the way that I see it is there's a ton of benefits to learning Julia in that context instead of Python. The nice part is if you learn a language like Julia, it inherently makes you different than everybody else who you're going to be competing with in a job. And in a job interview, and I've actually had this experience myself where I was interviewing for a job at Shopify, and during the interview process, I had the chance to sort of show the people who were interviewing me like what Julia is, why you would want to use it, and I think that is such a different experience for the people who are interviewing you to be able to share something new that they didn't know before. And I think, again, from a student's perspective, if you have that skill set, it's a huge opportunity to stand out from everybody else. And of course, again, if you know how to program in Julia, it's not like Python is so crazy different that you're not going to know how to program in Python too. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is trying to get students into the Julia ecosystem is a huge passion point for me, because I think there's so much opportunity to do really impactful work. Like somebody could come and create some resource that becomes the go-to learning resource in the Julia community and helps thousands and thousands of people learn a language for some specific, machine learning concept. And it's just so much more unlikely that you're going to have that impact in the Python community just because of how broad and saturated the ecosystem is. So I'm always trying to hammer home points like that to students, and then also to professors to say, the opportunities for students are going to be greater if they have something that makes them different, if they've had real impact in a specific community, and ultimately they're at school to get a job someday probably. So those two things are going to be huge in helping them get that job.
It's related to something that to a meeting I had 3 days ago actually, where there in most universities, most like large universities, there are like math education routes, right, for like math teachers to go into like K through 12 education. And I had a meeting with my like department chair, like vice chair, and she's trying to like incorporate programming languages into that. So that's what we were talking about, right? And the first one I mentioned was Julia, as like the most natural way to like look at the textbook, like the math book, and just like do the thing. And when, like after thinking about it, they decided on Python, but because that's just like the language, right? And it's kind of frustrating, but I understand it because I love Python as well. Like that's my main programming language as well. It's just, I don't know, hopefully over the next 2-3 years, there's like, I think, like you're saying, like if those resources are there and the educators that are teaching the people that will be the educators of the like K-12 education, like, right? Like if those resources are there, it'll be easier for professors to, jump on the Julia bandwagon where they should be. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who are making this transition. I see it all the time. I think there was, I'm thinking of a woman who I saw recently who was doing a bunch of Fortran stuff, talking about it on Twitter. And she had said that, she redid some of the code in Julia and, I forgot what the outcome of it was, but obviously it was positive, and talked about how she's transitioning her classes and things like that. So folks are definitely making that transition, but I think it takes, obviously in anything, education specifically, the status quo lives on for so long that
right.
Somebody has to go and shake it so that people make the jump, take the step. And I think it's a lot easier too when what I've seen a lot is universities where there's someone there who is a really strong Julia advocate tends to be the catalyst for their department and all the folks that they collaborate with, like slowly making this transition to Julia. So it really can be like one person. And Randy, maybe it's you at the university.
I know you're poking at me right now. You're poking at me because I really should, because I do feel so strongly about like using Julia, and I really enjoy it. And the students like it too. So the courses that I teach are typically at like the senior level at UH downtown. And so they get to experience like R and Python. And for like years, I was the one teaching the machine learning course as like their senior level course, right? And for like 2 years, I was using Julia. And they were just excited to like get to that third language because they'd been using Python and R the whole time. And they were just so curious about the J in Jupyter Notebooks.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point that I think maybe a lot of people don't know that is what the Ju in Jupyter, right, stands for. And maybe it's a little too ignored. Maybe we need to
just so
start
our listeners
emphasizing
know,
that more.
Yeah, just so our listeners know, Jupyter is Julia, Python, and R.
And it comes before the Python and the R, right? So it's the first thing.
That's a little poke right there.
Well, I wanted to kind of wrap it up by talking about JuliaCon, which is coming up, and so this will be my first time getting to attend, and I'm really excited about it. And I've seen videos from past years, and there's some obviously some really amazing stuff that people have presented there. I'm wondering what are you most excited about for JuliaCon this year?
I think the thing for JuliaCon every year that gets me so excited is just the chaotic energy of it. Like last year was like absolute chaos of us from an organizing side, like getting everything ready, making sure that it's the posters are set up and things going wrong, and it's tremendously taxing, but also like it ends up being a ton of fun. And for me, like I never actually end up getting to watch, at least for the last couple of years, any of the JuliaCon talks as they're happening. I think bar a few, just because I'm focusing on everything else. So it's nice to sort of conveniently afterwards like watch as many talks as I can and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a little sad that there won't be sort of an official in-person JuliaCon, but I am hopeful, and we're definitely going to be pushing on trying to get local meetup organizers to actually, assuming it's still safe to do so in whatever the local area is, like host a local version of JuliaCon. There'll definitely be something in Cambridge. I'll probably be in the Bay Area still.
I could do that at my university. I didn't know that was an option. Awesome. I could definitely request funds from my department, or maybe even Rice would want to do it, because that's where I learned about Julia, was at Rice when I was a grad student back in 2012. So no, thank you for saying that. That's pretty awesome. I really want to look into that more.
We'll have like an official post going out hopefully in the next, I just have to find the time to do it, in the next couple of weeks, sort of soliciting folks who are interested in sort of hosting those local meetups. I think, again, it'll be a ton of fun and be a way to sort of bring back the Julia in-person meetups, because I don't think that there's been any bar. I think the folks in Boston have been doing a bunch of stuff, but that's just because there's so many Julia folks and they have MIT and all that stuff. So it'll be cool to get meetups outside of that area. And again, I'm looking forward to attending, because there's so many. I work so closely with so many folks in the Julia community who I never actually see in person. So it's awesome to. Like Viral, for example, the only time I've ever met Viral is I didn't actually meet him. I walked past him. We were lived, I guess, in the same area in Cambridge, and I was on a walk with my little brother when I was living in Boston, and I walked past and I messaged him on Slack afterwards. I was like, "Hey, was that you walking around Fresh Pond in Cambridge?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was." So it'll be nice to meet and chat with so many folks who we all know virtually. So it'll be fun. I'm really excited. And the proposal deadline is, I was just looking before we started talking, it looks like it's April 4th for proposals. So get those in every JuliaCon is like crazy. I mean, not to put pressure on folks, but it becomes more and more selective every year, because there's just so many, and we expand it like 2x every year, and it still becomes more selective because there's so many awesome talks that people put in. So definitely get those talks in early. Definitely share as much stuff as you can. I think it's such an awesome time and an awesome platform to be able to talk about the cool Julia stuff you're doing. Like I think a Julia podcast episode could actually, like, just talking about the experience of doing a Julia podcast, it could be something interesting. I'm sure folks would find that relevant.
Oh, I've been working pretty hard on a thing that I'd like to submit a proposal on. So
I'm excited.
I'm hoping to get a chance. David and I, maybe together, we'll hopefully be able to talk about it.
Fingers crossed. We'll see how it goes. So any tips for people that are this is gonna be the first year they're attending JuliaCon? Any suggestions for them while they're there? Well, I know it's virtual, but while they're attending, is there going to be like a community side of it where there's like a chat or something where people can interact? Or
so there's so much different infrastructure for the conference that it actually gets a little bit confusing sometimes. So all the videos will technically be streaming through YouTube. So all pre-recorded, released on a time schedule on YouTube. And then we have a conference website that was developed called live.juliacon.org, and from there you can it'll just automatically play the next video and the next one's done
Cool.
on time sequence. So it's really nice. But that's for the actual watching of the videos. And then there's we're using Discord for the actual real-time chat, and then there'll be sort of synchronous poster presentations and social events on GatherTown again, like last year.
Cool.
So hopefully lots of opportunities too. And the advice I would give to folks is take advantage of those opportunities to actually meet people, talk to people, ask questions. That's the best way to sort of get a real pulse on who is in the Julia community and the cool work that people are doing. Watching videos is cool and fun, but it's definitely less enjoyable than going and actually talking to people who are at the conference.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's actually been my experience with, and it's kind of sad I don't mean to, for people that actually present. And I think this has more to do with in-person conferences, but I know I went to my first PyCon, I guess it's been 4 years now. And I had all, I got the program and I was like, okay, I'm going to go watch this talk. And then at the end of the conference, I was like, I missed 90% of the talks that I wanted to go to because I was just in the hallway chatting with people.
Yeah.
And it ended up that was actually a very meaningful part of the conference. So, and it was kind of well, I can always go back and watch the YouTube video. So I guess I didn't really miss much. Of course, it does kind of suck for you want to go support people that are speaking and you don't want them to talk to an empty room. But at the same time, being able to meet and network and then just get to ask questions to people that otherwise you may not even have access to because they're either too busy or, have other things going on and they're right there and able to interact with you. So I think that's great advice. That's in my experience has been really the best and most have lasting impact that I get from going to conferences. And are there plans? Are they looking to host it in person in the future? They want to get back to that, right? Is that something that they're going to try to do?
Yeah, I actually think this, last year's JuliaCon, we were talking at the end of the conference, we were like, in person next year for sure. We'll probably do it at MIT just because who knows what travel restrictions will be internationally, and then especially now with what seems like the 9th wave of COVID coming,
I know.
It makes sense to do things online this year. But 100%, I think we had for 2020 we had a conference venue lined up in Lisbon, Portugal, and I know that's still at least my understanding is that's still an open door. So It's just a question of whether 2023 will be Lisbon or whether it'll be staying stateside, depending on who knows what the situation will be.
I will go. Wherever it's at, I will go.
I'm going too. I'm excited. I think it'll be fun to travel and sort of... the downside to the virtual conferences, and I experienced this myself, is significantly less people actually set aside the time of the conference. I was doing my regular job, doing JuliaCon stuff, doing everything else. And when you're actually physically there, it's a lot easier to be in the actual conference
just
and
immerse
participating
yourself
in everything.
Yeah.
So it's, that's what I'm really excited for. And I think, Jarrett Revels, who has done a bunch of Julia stuff in the past, has a famous quote that a year's worth of Julia development happens, in one JuliaCon. And I think the virtual JuliaCon is probably 0.6 years worth of Julia development, and the in-person one's probably actually that full year. So it'll be nice to be back in person for that.
For sure. Well, I think we need to kind of wrap this up, and I have a couple of questions for you so you're the inaugural guest here on the Talk Julia podcast. So these questions may change, but I was thinking a lot of the podcasts I listen to, they always have a couple of questions they do at the end. And these are the two I came up with. I think they're pretty standard but what code editor do you use when you write Julia?
VS Code. If you're not using VS Code, you're making a mistake.
That's great. Yeah, that's my favorite as well. And what's your favorite Julia package?
That's interesting. Slack.jl, which was the Slack wrapper written in, just because it was the first Julia package that I ever wrote. So I feel a great deal of, and to find out that someone else in the world is actually using Slack.jl for their corporate Slack stuff, I was like, that's kind of cool. I built it as a pet project, and I'm really happy that it actually helps somebody beyond just me with a bunch of the Slack integrations that I've done. So
awesome.
That was really funny. Both David and I have used Slack before, and our heads went like when you said Slack.jl, because I haven't heard about that. I know David hasn't heard about it.
I hadn't heard that package, no.
That's awesome.
It's not very good. Don't go look at it. It's really not. It's pretty old.
It up right now. No. I'm going to share my screen so everyone on YouTube sees it. Well, Logan, thank you so much for joining us today. And it's been a blast getting to meet you in virtually in person, I guess, if that makes sense, and chat with us. So
yeah, I feel like I know you now. This is good. Right? Like
I totally agree. I think it's there's so many people who I think before we had this conversation, it was like you, in that I like see all their stuff on Twitter and interact with them and stuff, but haven't actually had that face-to-face conversation. So it was super great to meet both of you. And I'm really glad that you're doing this podcast. It was something that was on my ever-growing to-do list of, at some point we need a Julia podcast. And I'm like, thank God that somebody did it, took that responsibility away from me. So I appreciate both of you for the hard work of putting this together, and you've done an incredible job so far. So I appreciate all the hard work.
Thanks. Yeah, we've just been blown away by this really was just sort of, I came to, I guess before we leave, I should just share kind of the backstory of this as I remember it. It's, even though it was only 2 months ago, it seems like forever ago now, but I went and had a chat with one of my old employers, and just catching up. I hadn't seen each other in a long time. And this guy, he works in the wedding and events industry. He's like a CEO of this wedding venue in Houston, and really wedding events group. They do all sorts of stuff. And I used to do like a bunch of data analytics and stuff for him. And he came to me, we were just having coffee and just chatting. And he said, "You ever heard of a programming language called Julia?" And I was like, first of all, how do you know about Julia? Like, this guy's not a technical person, right? Like, and he's like, "Oh, my nephew's friend is starting to use it," or I don't forget who exactly it was. And then I thought to myself, like, holy cow, if someone like this is already, like, if they are somehow have become aware of Julia, like, I need to start learning this, because that's a sign. It was a sign to me anyway. So I went to Randy, who's been like, trying to get me to use Julia for the last 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I was like, "Randy, I think I'm ready to start learning Julia." And he was like, "That's awesome. And we should do something like public about it." And then, we decided to start this podcast. It's just a way to kind of document that journey of, him, me learning it for the first time, and Randy, helping me and relearning it. Yeah. Cause he'd kind of stopped using it in his teaching. He'd been using more Python and everything. And neither of us were really ready. It was just sort of like this happy accident, I guess, of like, there was this huge desire and need for something like that in the Julia community, that it was literally on like we released this episode, and on day 2, it had like over 100, 150 downloads. And we picked up a bunch of, we were like, whoa, that was totally unexpected. So, and then, of course, then it's like, wow, I guess we need to take this seriously. So yeah. But
no, you've both done an incredible job. I think the best things in life are those happy accidents, and yeah. I'm so glad that it's working out well so far. I'm super excited.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us and hanging out and talking Julia with us.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
All right. See you.